just a reminder, I'm with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection in the Nonpoint Source Management Program. So our program is really, we're a funding organization, as well as we work on projects like the state education and Florida friendly landscaping. So we're really here to fund these types of projects. I'm going to tell you about a lot of different funding sources with the agency. The ones that I can answer the most questions about and that I'm going to focus on are our grants, which are our federal 319 grant and our state water quality assistance grant. Those two combined offer about $8 million a year that we are able to give out to the communities. And I should mention, I know we have a mixed audience today, so these are grants that are intended to go to local governments, special districts, and public universities. So I know we have some folks on today that are representing nonprofits and HOAs and other different groups. And what I would encourage you to do is, while you're, if you're thinking about this as something that your community would be interested in, know that we're really open to working with you through your city or through your county, and making sure that you can have access to these funds with a municipal partner. So without further ado, our federal grant, the 319 grant, this has a few things that separate it from our SWAG grant. It is able to fund a few more types of projects than the SWAG is, but both are eligible for our green stormwater infrastructure projects. Aside from the funding, this project does have a match. So for each project, we're looking at about 40% match requirement. We are fairly strict on that requirement. There is a little leeway, and if another project overmatches, we can give a little bit of flexibility, but we do want to see that match. On the positive side, we're pretty flexible with where that match comes from, and you are able to leverage any of the other funding sources I'm going to talk about today against the federal funding to meet your match requirements. The other big thing with this grant is that it can take about 2 years from the time that you submit a project proposal to when you would actually be able to use the funding. That's because it is a federal grant, and so it doesn't only have to go through DEP's approval process and ranking and scoring, but then we send it to EPA, and they typically hold on to it for anywhere from 8 months to a year. So that just adds up to about 18 months, 2 years. The State Water Quality Assistance Grant, that's our state grant. So we have maybe a little bit more control over this one. Some of the benefits of this one is there's no required match and there's no required monitoring. Those are two important notes because this grant was formerly known as the TMDL grant. So if you have experience with our state grants, that one, it didn't just go away, it got a name change when we took off those two requirements. Both of those things are still good. We still like to see match. It shows that the community has some buy-in into the project, and they're in it financially as well. And we like to see monitoring, especially for GSI projects where we're trying to really get some of that data about it, but they're not required. This one does have a faster turnaround date. We don't have set, guarantees of how quickly the money would be able to turn around, but instead of, 18 months to 2 years, it might be within 4 to 8 months. Again, that just kind of depends on how long it takes for the DEP processes, what's happening with the governor's office, and whether or not they have time to review our project selections. As well as just how long it takes for you to work with your grant manager and write the contract. I've seen grants written within a week. I've seen grants take a year to get written. Kind of comes down to who's focused on what on your end. So again, these are shovel-ready projects. So that means we're not looking for projects that still need to go under design. We're really focused on projects that have been designed, the land has been acquired, you just need the money to get the construction going. So for submitting a proposal, we've tried to make it as easy as possible. Again, you have to be local government, special district, public university. But once you are sure that you're eligible for the project, you can actually apply for both of our funding sources through one project proposal. This gives us the flexibility to look at all of the projects at once. We used to do 2 solicitations, and so we would look at the different federal and state grant applications at one time or at separate times, and now we can look at them together and we can help you leverage those funds. We can help decide which grant might be the best option for you. And it just helps everybody get the best project funded with the right funding amount and all of that good stuff. And to submit those proposals, the form is not actually online. You do have to contact Emily Foranash with my program in order to get a copy of that. It just changes so frequently due to a lot of different variables that we found that's the easiest way to conduct this. But she's very responsive and she'll get back to you right away. We do solicitations twice a year. We don't have an exact date. We used to, but again, there's just been a lot of changes lately. And so we try to send out solicitations around September, October, and then March and April. But it really depends on what is happening within the agency. For example, earlier, I guess that was late last year, there was a solicitation that went out where the agency made it possible to have one project proposal form throughout the last, one project proposal form for all of the different funding sources relating to water quality. That was through the Protecting Florida Together program. I don't know if they're going to do that again next year. So again, that kind of changes how we would do our solicitation, because then that throws a third one into the mix. But the best way to stay up to date on when a solicitation is to go to our website. And the link is at the bottom of the screen. I think Caitlin's going to throw it in the chat for me. And you can join our mailing list and you'll get an email every time that the solicitation window is open again. That being said, we also accept grants year round. And we do this because we are in the business of giving money away, and nobody ever believes me when I say sometimes that's hard to do. We'll have projects that come under budget. We'll have projects that fall through and get canceled for a variety of reasons. And then we end up with money that we need to make sure we find a home for it and that it's put towards a good use. So if you have a good project, don't hang on to it and don't hide it from us until a solicitation period. Go ahead and reach out to Emily or myself and let us know, and we can work with you and accept that proposal ahead of time. Another thing is we can talk to you about your projects. A lot of people are surprised by this because typically with grants and things like that, there's more competitive procurement and it's like a bidding process. But for our grants, it's not so. And that's part of why we don't call it an application. It's a proposal. We are a different type of procurement process as defined by the state. And so we're able to talk with you. If you have a project idea, even if it's really basic, you can reach out to us and we can talk you through it. We can talk about, what would meet our funding eligibility requirements the best, and work with you towards that project goal. I should also mention our typical funding amounts are going to be, we don't have an official funding cap, so there's no maximum amount of our grant awards, but most projects are going to be under $500,000. Typically, if you have a project that's larger than that, what we're going to do is recommend that you break it up into phases so that phase 1 could be funded one grant cycle, and then phase 2 or 3 or however many could be funded in later cycles. You just want to make sure that those phases can operate independently, just because there's no guarantee if you get phase 1 that you would get phase 2. So those were our kind of what I call our funding sources in the Nonpoint Source program, but we have some sister programs that I always like to talk about because they're just as applicable to green stormwater infrastructure projects. 2 of those are our water quality projects that get selected by the Florida legislature and the Springs projects, which go through your water management district. So you would need to contact your water management district and your local legislative representative in order to talk about how you would get that project proposal submitted. My understanding is that their processes are different throughout the different groups, but I do know that they would be eligible for green stormwater infrastructure. So definitely talk to those folks, because if you were awarded those grants, again, those grants could then be leveraged against our federal grant to help you meet your match. So you could potentially get your entire project funded through grants just by getting a little fancy with the different funding sources. Finally, we have the State Revolving Funds Loan Program. And I know loans aren't as attractive as grants, but this one is a pretty good loan program if you've got to go that route. They have significantly more funding available. So their loans, they can do small loans, less than 50,000, or they could do loans worth several million. I think it really depends on the project and the scope that you're looking at. Oftentimes, this loan is used for large scale redevelopment. They do a lot of clean water, so that could be wastewater as well as stormwater. And we really encourage you to reach out to them because, again, with their loan program, you could leverage the loan funding against our federal grant funding. And that's really an advantage to you because as part of this loan program, they require you to develop a planning document that is fairly thorough. But in that document, the SRF folks within DEP, they can help you look at that and decide at which point in the process you might need to apply for a grant. So you could kind of have a stepping stone list of when you need to do what in order to maximize how much financial assistance you may be eligible for from the state. The loan rates are also going to be almost assuredly guaranteed the best that you would find. They're very, very low interest, and the interest rate depends on the community. So it's based on the financial situation of each community. So this is just kind of an example of how you might use the federal SRF loan to kind of work with some of your other grant processes. This one has it starting in September of 1 year, and then every couple years you would want to apply for different grants and talk with us throughout that process. Again, just like us, the SRF group, we're not shielded from secrecy. Call us, we can talk to you, we can work out a plan and help you navigate this process because we know it can be confusing. So this is the Tavares Stormwater Park. And while this isn't the type of green infrastructure that we're really excited about and that Eben was just talking about, this is a really great project. And they did a really good job of leveraging those funds. And before I talk about all the funding sources that they used, I want to point out where this area is. So over here on the right side of your screen, that's actually a jail. And then there's a mobile home park on the other side. So not maybe the area typically thought of as a great tourism spot, just between a neighborhood and a jail and some train tracks. But what they did with this project is they actually had a lot of different funding sources. They had several different 319 grants, as well as they had the SWAG grant back when it was called the TMDL grant. They had a legislative appropriation grant. They had a whole different grant called TMDL category. And then they also had a significant amount of funding from the state SRF loan program. And they used all of this funding for pretty extensive drainage improvements. I think they were also looking at some flooding issues. So that's part of why they needed a fairly large treatment drain pond system. They also conducted some public education. So they had signage around the lake. They created the walkways and the bridges that went over the water. They also paved an area called Ruby Street, ironically, with red brick pavers. I can show you there. So they paved Ruby Street with pervious pavers, as well as a pervious paver parking lot area. They also had those floating vegetation mats and some submerged aquatic vegetation, so plants planted in the water that again help with more nutrient uptake and all of that great stuff. So Tavares, they had some administrators that were really great. They weren't afraid to call and talk to us and work out a plan and really figure out how to leverage those funds. So that's kind of would normally be the end of what I would be talking about with our funding. But you all have kind of an advantage here. We just had a new funding solicitation that went out. This is the first year that we're trying this kind of new direction, where we're very specifically looking for certain types of green stormwater infrastructure projects. And we're calling it the calling it the GSI Pilot Project Solicitation. And the goal of this is to get data and collect metrics on how green infrastructure is operated specifically in Florida. And so for this, we're looking to be part of the process from everything from design through construction, monitoring, and maintenance. We are partnering with Evan and some other folks from UF to get this done. And all we are really looking for right now is folks who have land, need a green stormwater infrastructure project, and want to be a partner with us. Benefits to the partner groups would be that they would be able to work with us to have everything from the design through a maintenance plan at no cost. There is kind of a caveat with that. None of our grant funding is eligible for design. So what we're doing is we're actually working with Evan, and he has graciously volunteered to provide the design as match in exchange. And then we're going to work with him on a monitoring project so that we can get that design as part of the project if a community doesn't have somebody on staff who can conduct the design. That's important to distinguish because I know I've talked to a couple people about this already who needed, maybe the explanation that if they have an engineer on staff, we wouldn't be able to reimburse for that cost. The only amount of the cost that would be reimbursed to the community would be for that actual construction itself. And that would be through a cost reimbursement grant, which I can go into in a minute. Also important to note for these, the host community would be solely responsible for the maintenance. We would work with you to develop a maintenance plan to make sure that you know how to maintain the plants or the pavers or whatever the project type may be. But it would be up to the community to conduct the maintenance themselves, as none of our funding is eligible for maintenance. So our project types include bioswales and retention cells, tree boxes, which I think might be the only one Evan maybe didn't go over, but fortunately I got a picture here. So that's, if you've ever seen a tree growing straight out of concrete, that's hopefully a tree box, or it's maybe a struggling tree, where it's kind of what it sounds like. It's a tree in a box, so that stormwater is sent through the box where the tree can help treat and uptake some of that water, as well as the pervious pavement, green walls, and green roofs. So those are the types of green infrastructure that we're really looking for specifically with the pilot projects. Other types would still be eligible for our traditional funding sources. So if you are interested in this, to be eligible to participate with the pilot project, you have to be representative from a local government or other municipality. Some special districts like community development districts can also be eligible for this funding. You must have property to do this. We are not looking to fund the acquisition of the property, and it must have a direct impact on an impaired water body. So Evan talked earlier about the BMAPs and the TMDLs. So if you have a property that is directly impacting one of those, that would be perfect. You also have to be able to conduct the maintenance. You have to be able to work through a cost reimbursement grant, which means you would have to be able to pay your contractor first and then show us proof of payment, and then we would be able to reimburse you for those costs. We wouldn't necessarily have to be all at once. We can do what's called interim payment, so we could pay a little by little, but you would still need some sort of funding up front to pay the contractors. There is no required match for this, so that isn't another advantage to the pilot project, is because we're really just looking for the best possible projects to really show and collect the data about these projects. There is no required match. As always, match helps. It shows the commitment to the project, and so that's going to help with your scoring against other projects, but it's not required. And same as our other funding sources, we're really looking for smaller projects here, so probably around that 500,000 cap, but smaller projects may get preference for this just so that we can see the turnaround time faster to get the projects designed, constructed, and completed in order to have those case studies to share with other communities. I have a helpful link section here, and I know I talked to Caitlin ahead of time, and she said we'll be able to send you a PDF of this PowerPoint. So don't feel like you have to write all these down right away, but this is just a link source of all the different funding websites that we've talked about today. And if anybody has any questions, I'm here.
Thank you so much, Emily. I know I have a question to kick off with the GSI pilot projects. I know that there's a monetary size that you're looking for, but is there a land size or acreage that you're looking for?
There is not, and Evan, feel free to chime in if you disagree with me, but we don't have a land size just because these different types of projects can be so different. So no, short answer.
Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily a land size constraint to it. I mean, that's going to be dictated by the budget. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. And are there any additional questions from the group for Emily? All right. Well, seeing none, I'd like to just open the floor for any questions for any of our presenters today. We've had a great workshop where we started with what is Florida-friendly landscaping and the programming that is available for homeowners and communities and municipalities. And we've gone all the way through the science behind it, what's happening with the water, and then to the funding. So hopefully it's provided a full scope of the opportunities that are available to make sure that we are managing our stormwater and that we have infrastructure in place to help protect our natural communities and our water quality. So yes, Vicki, I see your hand.
I actually think I maybe do have a question for Emily, but I don't know. Is there anybody like from St. Augustine who's on here? Because they have a terrible problem with stormwater flooding and such, and I'm just wondering if they're aware of this pilot project that you just told us about, and whether we should try to put them in touch with you.
Great question, Vicki.
I mean, I know the city manager. I mean, I guess I could give him Emily's name or something, but
we can also help connect with that relationship. But if there is anybody from the city who would like to address that question. And Jessica, it looks like you might be on mute.
Not muted, but we can't hear your mic.
Yeah, I don't know if you have a fancy thing like I do, or you want to reconnect to a different mic.
And Vicki, I don't think I've spoken to anybody with this directly, but I do believe they have applied for grants in the past, so they probably would be on our mailing list.
oh, good. Okay. All right. It just seems like, it could be in the city's interest to try to do some of these things. So I just want to make sure they're plugged into it. So
Absolutely. And I know that Jessica is with the city of St. Augustine. And
oh, okay, that's good. All right. Well,
so she is here, and I think there she is. She is the Chief Resilience Officer and the Stormwater Engineer with the city. And so she is.
Sounds like this is straight up her alley then.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vicki. And thank you, Jessica.
And I just put my email in the chat box. So anybody, else who's online or Vicki or Jessica, feel free to email me and let me know if you'd like to set up a call to talk about a potential project.
Great, thank you. This is a perfect example of just making connections and getting folks together. All right, any other questions for our presenters this morning? All right, well, feel free if any come to mind, type them into the chat box. But I'd also like to go ahead and get a poll out there for you. So a poll should be popping up on your screen right now. We'd love to hear from you to see what kind of information you've learned during this morning's workshop. And while you're doing that, I would like to extend a a huge round of applause to our presenters, Claire, Evan, and Emily. We appreciate you joining us this morning to share more about this. And I'd also like to extend a thank you to those of you who joined us this morning. You guys are the lucky ones. We found out during this workshop that some of our emails sent last week have landed in some spam and clutter boxes. So you are the ones who found the join link this morning. And we are appreciative that you did. And for those that were unable to make it, fortunately, these workshops are being recorded, and so we'll be able to share that information with them. If you did join the workshop a little bit late, just a reminder that there are several CEUs that are approved and pending for today's workshop. So be sure to email or send a direct message to me, Caitlin Dietz, or to Abigail Kuhn here in Zoom. So that way we can make sure that we get your license number and are able to get those CEUs in your direction. For anybody who is joining any of the other State of the Reserve events, we're going to share the join information in the chat box. So that way there are no additional technology issues moving forward. And we've created a passcode protected page on the stateofthereserve.org website where all that information is. And finally, we will be sending out a survey at the end of this week, just getting some feedback on our first virtual State of the Reserve. If there are additional questions or programming, or if you want to say, we need more information on this, we'd be happy to work with you to get that information to you and to hear what you think. And with that, I think that we will go ahead and wrap up this morning's workshop. Again, thank you to our presenters, and thank you to those of you who were able to join us this morning, and we hope to see you the rest of the week.